Imagine arriving in a new country, you're ready to dive into your studies, only to find maybe your biggest obstacle isn't the coursework itself. It's that nagging feeling that maybe you're an imposter and your English just isn't quite, good enough. Or perhaps this whole academic world seems to demand a completely different you than the one you're used to, almost like a new identity, a new voice. Welcome to Daily English Practice, Listen and Speak. Today, we're taking a deep dive into English for studying abroad. Specifically, we're looking at the essential guide to mastering academic writing, and we're going beyond just grammar and vocabulary here. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Many of you listening are probably either thinking about studying abroad, or maybe you're already there, right? Trying to navigate the unique demands of academic English. Our mission today is really to equip you with insights from leading experts on academic writing. We want to help you understand not just the mechanics like structure and style, but also those subtle shifts in thinking, and even the psychological side of producing high quality academic work in English. It's really about finding your footing in a whole new linguistic landscape.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that we've pulled from a really comprehensive guide on academic writing. It's specifically tailored for international students, which is key. So it's not just a rule book. It's more about understanding the entire ecosystem of academic communication, everything from crafting a really precise sentence right through to, well, navigating those emotional challenges that can definitely pop up when you're writing in a second language. This guide, it includes some invaluable insights from seasoned academics, people like Jane Bottomley and Stephen Bailey, offering practical tips on everything from scientific style to finding your own unique academic voice.
Right. And when you're writing academically, especially maybe in scientific fields, it's really not just about what amazing discoveries you've made. It's also crucially about how clearly and effectively you convey them. Our sources really emphasize this. Even if the scientific content is incredibly complex, the text itself, the writing, it has to be crystal clear, easy to read. There's a great quote from Peter Medawar, a Nobel laureate mentioned in our sources. He put it perfectly. No one who has something original or important to say will willingly run the risk of being misunderstood. Unquote. And that's really the core principle, isn't it? Guiding academic writing.
That really raises a key question, though. What exactly makes a text clear, especially when you're dealing with pretty intricate scientific concepts? Well, often it comes down to things like strategic sentence length and thoughtful text organization. Academic writing typically uses a mix, a purposeful combination of long and short sentences. We see examples where a text is just vastly easier to read because it's broken down into shorter, more digestible sentences. And each one is anchored by a main verb. And crucially, these sentences often start with a general definition or concept, and then they gradually unfold into more specific details. Think about the difference between one, like, incredibly convoluted sentence trying to define, I don't know, telecommunications engineering, versus breaking it down into maybe three concise, clear sentences. The impact on just immediate comprehension is huge. It's really about guiding your reader, not, overwhelming them.
Yeah, exactly. Guiding, not overwhelming. And it's not just about the length either, is it? It's about impact and efficiency. The guide points out that really clear scientific language is, well, it's concise. Wordiness and redundancy, they aren't just annoying for the reader. They can be incredibly distracting, confusing even. Often they kind of signal that the writer isn't fully in control of their ideas, like the examples you mentioned. All of the studies had limitations just becomes all studies had limitations. Simple. Or scientists need to find solutions to solve these problems. Why not just scientists need to find solutions? You're really aiming for directness, stripping away anything that doesn't absolutely add value, making every word count.
And building right on that point about conciseness, precision is absolutely paramount. Our sources strongly warn against using vague expressions, things like etc. or and so on. Now, these might be okay in your informal notes, maybe, but in academic writing, they really undermine your credibility. They imply you're not being exact. Instead, the guide suggests using specific connectors, like such as when you're giving examples. That way, the reader knows exactly what you're referring to. It also highlights how important it is to use common collocations, words that naturally go together, and fixed phrases that have precise meanings. For instance, changing something like, there are a number of factors of blood pressure to, there are a number of factors affecting blood pressure. See, this isn't just about grammar being technically correct. It's really about conveying your ideas with absolute exactitude, leaving no room for misinterpretation or ambiguity in your research.
Okay, so pulling this together, what does this all mean for your own writing? When you're sitting down to write that paper, It means consciously adopting a very specific academic style. And our sources, they give some really insightful ways to spot the differences, sometimes subtle differences, between academic texts and non-academic ones. You know, the stuff you might find in popular science books or even quality journalism. It's not just about being formal, it's about understanding the function and the conventions, those unspoken rules of scholarly communication.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the set of conventions that academic texts tend to rigorously follow. They use careful, cautious language, hedging sometimes it's called, to avoid overgeneralizations. So think about discussing, say, projected cases of a disease. You probably wouldn't say this will result in X, you'd hedge it slightly, this is likely to result, or this may lead to. This caution reflects the academic rigor, the tentativeness of research findings sometimes. They also tend to be impersonal, often favoring passive constructions, like much of the devastation has been attributed to, rather than actively using I or we. And this impersonal style, it's not just a stylistic quirk, it subtly shifts the focus away from the researcher and onto the evidence itself. It lends that air of objectivity, letting the facts speak, rather than just an individual's opinion. That's interesting. Shifting the focus.
Yeah. And you'll also find specific scientific and technical terminology, obviously, a consistently neutral and formal tone. Careful punctuation, like colons, often used to organize ideas within sentences. And, crucially, they always contain meticulous references to sources, following standard conventions like Bullet et al., 2010. This grounds every claim in existing research and, of course, gives credit where it's due.
Right. And this is probably where you might need to actively, unlearn some conversational habits you've picked up over the years. Things they're fine in everyday talk. For example, instead of saying, Brown got a Nobel Prize, the academic style would definitely prefer Brown received a Nobel Prize. It sounds more formal. Or about 200 people becomes approximately 200 people. Just more precise. Our sources highlight avoiding informal expressions, like using though at the end of a sentence in favor of although maybe earlier, and consistently using such as instead of like for examples. They also issue a clear warning against informal verbs or phrases. So get worse becomes deteriorate. Make easier becomes facilitate. And those conversational fillers we all use, actually, by the way, a lot of those should really be actively cut out from formal academic writing. These aren't just minor tweaks, are they? These small shifts add up and make a massive difference in maintaining that objective, authoritative tone that academic work demands.
Absolutely. And that leads us nicely into considering an important nuance regarding voice. While academic writing often leans heavily towards that impersonal style we just discussed, there's a vital distinction to make. It's not always black and white. Some students, particularly those doing qualitative research maybe, or critical analysis, often express a preference for using phrases like, I argue that. They want to clearly convey their specific perspective or their contribution to the field.
So sometimes I is okay.
Sometimes, yes. Our sources acknowledge this. They note that different disciplines, and even different individual professors or assessors, might have varying expectations. They mentioned one student, Diego, who initially felt uncomfortable being critical of others' works in an academic context. But he learned to adopt a more assertive, critical voice as part of his academic development. The key here, really, is to understand your specific field's conventions. You need to know the norms and adapt your voice accordingly. Even if, as one Chinese student thoughtfully described it, it feels a bit like stepping into a new identity or putting on a kind of mask. It's about strategically deploying the right voice for the right academic context.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk structure. Starting with the real basics. Paragraphs. Paragraphs are absolutely fundamental building blocks in academic writing, aren't they? They don't just break up the text visually, they act like mini arguments. Each one should be a single, focused thought that guides your reader along. The real insight here, which our sources really emphasize, is how often academic writers, especially maybe those newer to the style, kind of lose this focus. They let paragraphs sprawl or jump between disconnected ideas. It gets messy.
So what defines a strong academic paragraph then? How do you avoid that messiness?
Well, essentially, it's a unified group of sentences, and they're all dealing with a single, clear topic. Typically, you're looking at no less than maybe 4 or 5 sentences long to allow for proper development of the idea. The first sentence usually introduces this topic. It acts like a clear signpost for the reader. Then in the subsequent sentences, they provide definitions or offer specific examples, maybe expand with extra information, provide reasons, or offer concise summaries. But crucially, they all directly support that initial topic sentence. Right, everything connects back.
Exactly. And these parts aren't just, randomly strung together. They're smoothly linked. You use reference words, conjunctions, adverbs, things that subtly guide the reader through the logic of the argument.
It's all about building a coherent, logical flow that makes your ideas really easy to follow.
Okay, so once you have these well-constructed paragraphs, these building blocks, how do they fit into the bigger picture, the whole academic paper? Whether it's a short essay or maybe a full dissertation, there are common formats you'll likely encounter, and each has its own specific purpose. Short essays, for instance, often follow a pretty straightforward introduction, main, body, conclusion pattern. Nice and simple. But for longer essays, and definitely for reports, you'll start seeing additional, more specialized sections. Things like a literature review, which sets the context for your work by discussing previous research, or maybe a detailed case study, or a focused discussion section where you interpret your findings. And then dissertations and journal articles, they take this even further, right? They demand an abstract right at the start, a comprehensive list of contents, maybe a list of tables if you have data, detailed findings section, even acknowledgments. And alongside all that, the crucial full list of references and any appendices. Each component really serves a vital role in presenting that complete, rigorous academic argument. And thinking about reports versus essays specifically, they serve different, though sometimes overlapping, functions. Reports are generally much more specific and detailed than essays. They're often based on primary research like surveys you conducted or experiments, and they tend to rely quite heavily on numbering and subheadings for really clear organization. Imagine a report analyzing specific student accommodation preferences based on survey data you collected. It's very empirical, very structured.
Right, very data-driven usually.
Exactly. Essays, on the other hand, they tend to be more argumentative, perhaps, or interpretive, synthesizing existing knowledge rather than presenting new primary data. However, both types demand that clear, logical format we talked about. Both need an objective academic style, rigorous citations, and often the strategic inclusion of visuals like graphs and diagrams, but only where they genuinely enhance understanding.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. And if we connect this back to the overall structure, introductions and conclusions are just so critical. They're like the paper's bookends. They frame your entire argument.
And Pat?
A really compelling introduction. It isn't just about vaguely defining key terms or giving a bit of background. It must clearly state your aim. It needs to signal to the reader exactly what the paper will cover. Avoid those overly general or vague opening sentences that don't really say anything.
Like a roadmap for the reader?
Precisely. It's a roadmap for the entire paper. And conclusions, while they're typically shorter, they are equally vital. They don't just summarize your main findings, although they do that. They should explicitly link back to your original research question or aim, clearly demonstrating that you've addressed it. They also provide important space to discuss any limitations of your work, which shows critical awareness, suggest avenues for future research, and comment on the broader implications or significance of your findings. It's really about bringing your argument to a clear, satisfying close, reinforcing the value and the impact of your study.
Now, this next part is really crucial and maybe surprisingly often overlooked in discussions about academic writing. Studying abroad, especially when you're writing in a second language, it can bring up some significant emotional challenges. And our sources directly address something called the imposter phenomenon. This isn't just, a fleeting feeling of self-doubt. It's a very real and documented psychological pattern that can seriously impact your academic journey. And it seems particularly prevalent among international students navigating this new environment.
Yes, the imposter phenomenon, or imposter syndrome as it's often called. It's that pervasive belief that you're not truly competent, that you're not really qualified for your role despite external evidence of success, good grades, positive feedback. It's the fear that others will eventually discover you're a fraud.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It can be. And research consistently shows that international students speaking English as a second language can experience significantly higher writing anxiety and less confidence in their abilities, which feeds right into this. One student, reflecting on their experience, described it really vividly. They said their heart was pounding and feeling as though their head was going to burst when surrounded by experienced researchers. This imposter syndrome, it can even manifest as debilitating perfectionism, making it impossible to start writing, or chronic writer's block, all stemming from that profound fear of being found out as inadequate. But what's fascinating and often really helpful to know is that simply naming the imposter phenomenon, understanding what it is, and realizing how incredibly common it is, even among highly accomplished academics, surprisingly, just knowing that can dramatically reduce its power.
Just knowing you're not alone makes a difference.
Exactly. It's like shining a light on a shadow. Once you see it clearly for what it is, it often loses some of its grip.
Okay, so that's understanding it, but what can you practically do about it if you're feeling that way?
Well, acknowledging these feelings, as you said, and knowing they're incredibly common is the essential first step. Don't beat yourself up about it. The source suggests actively talking to fellow students, maybe even engaging in online communities specifically for international students. Sharing these experiences can be incredibly validating and, frankly, really helpful, just knowing others feel the same way.
Finding that community.
Yeah. And it also highlights practical, actionable steps for managing the anxiety and the procrastination that often come with it. This includes things like setting a clear, maybe non-negotiable writing schedule and really trying to stick to it, recognizing that at some point, you simply have to stop researching and start writing. You can't research forever. That avoids the last-minute panic. Breaking down those huge writing tasks, like a whole chapter, into smaller, more manageable micro-tasks can also make the whole process feel far less daunting. That leads really nicely into another important question. How do we truly grow as academic writers? Well, a huge part of it is through feedback and support systems. Tailored supervisor feedback is absolutely critical for development. It doesn't just improve your content, but also your language use, your rhetorical organization, how you structure your arguments. The guide really emphasizes the importance of scheduling regular meetings with your supervisor. And if it helps you process the information, maybe even audio recording those meetings so you can review their comments carefully later.
That's a good tip, recording them.
Yeah, it can be really useful. And beyond supervisors, peer support networks are incredibly valuable. Sharing drafts, giving and receiving critiques of each other's work, and openly discussing those writing anxieties we talked about. This can profoundly reduce feelings of isolation and inadequacy. Learning to both give and receive constructive feedback, even though it can sometimes feel stressful, is just immensely beneficial for developing both your writing skills and your confidence as an academic.
And finally, it really circles back to that core idea we started with in the intro. It's ultimately about finding your unique academic voice within this new context. Our sources speak really compellingly about that internal shift some students experience, like moving from their, say, Chinese self to developing an English self for academia, or shifting from simply providing descriptive summaries of other people's work to developing a truly critical, persuasive voice of your own.
Developing your own argument.
Exactly. It's also about things like strategically varying your citation patterns so your own arguments don't get completely lost amidst all the references to other scholars, making sure your voice comes through. And crucially, it involves actively learning those common academic phrases from expert writers in your field. Resources like the Academic Phrase Bank, which offers hundreds of useful sentence stems and phrases for different language functions like introducing, comparing, contrasting,
Oh yeah, that's a great resource.
or even just using Google Scholar strategically to check how common certain phrases are within your specific discipline. These are invaluable tools. This idea of language reuse, it isn't about memorizing whole sentences or obviously plagiarizing. Absolutely not. It's more about internalizing those commonly accepted academic building blocks. Think of phrases like, the finding suggests a strong correlation between X and Y, or further research is warranted in this area.
Yeah.
By adopting these established patterns, you signal that you understand your field's discourse. It makes your arguments immediately recognizable and credible within that specific academic conversation. It's really about learning to speak the language of your discipline fluently and, ultimately, authoritatively.
So to wrap up, today we've really explored the intricate and, often challenging world of academic writing, specifically for international students. From understanding those strict requirements of clarity, conciseness, and precision in academic style, to decoding the sometimes subtle conventions of formal English, and also recognizing the absolutely critical role of emotional and social support systems. It's clear that mastering English for studying abroad is a really multifaceted journey. We discuss foundational elements like getting your paragraph structure right and understanding the essential architecture of different academic papers, from short essays right up to full dissertations. And we emphasize the strategic importance of those well-crafted introductions and conclusions that really frame your entire argument.
And the journey of academic writing in a new language, it really isn't just about learning a set of rules, is it? It's about a profound transformation. Sometimes it feels like a reinvention of your writer's identity. So as you navigate these waters, as you learn to speak this new academic language, maybe ask yourself this. How will mastering this academic voice not only enhance my studies and my future career prospects, but how might it also shape the way I think and communicate in all areas of my life? Allowing you perhaps to express your ideas with greater clarity, greater precision, no matter the context. Something to think about.